So thank you everyone for joining us today for Families in Crisis, Research and Policy Solutions for Ending Family Homelessness. We have a great group of presenters joining us today, and I want to do a quick introduction of the folks we have speaking today. We have Ben Henwood joining us, professor at Dworak-Peck University of Southern California School of Social Work. Deborah Paget, professor at NYU's Silver School of Social Work. Sam Batko, senior fellow at the Urban Institute's Metropolitan Housing and Communities Policy Center. And Rhonda Jackson, community engagement consultant and senior fellow with the Family Homelessness Coalition. Our discussion today will be moderated by Mary McKay, the Vice Provost of Interdisciplinary Initiatives at Washington University in St. Louis. And Mary will be helping with our Q&A portion at the end of this presentation. Now I'd like to also recognize Nicholas Asher and Sanjam Dutt, who are also with us on the call, who are program coordinators with the Academy and are helping out with the coordination for this webinar and policy briefing today. I am Stephanie Anderson. I'm with the Clark Fox Policy Institute at Washington University in St. Louis as well. I'd like to hand it over to Alex Maldonado from KC Family Programs to share a little bit about the 21st Century Research Agenda and welcome us all.
Thank you, Stephanie, and happy Thursday. Nice to see everybody. Thank you for joining. So just a little bit overall, since May of 2019, a diverse group of researchers, DEI experts, people with lived experience with the child welfare system, and policy experts have worked together collaboratively to identify research gaps, to enhance the development of a 21st century approach to a child and family well-being system. And what began as a partnership between KC Family Programs and Annie E. Casey Foundation and the William T. Grant Foundation has evolved into a wider coalition of academic, national, and philanthropic organizations, bolstered by extensive participation from individuals with life experience with child welfare. So we believe that these new studies should address the most critical issues facing the field so that the research findings can be used to support innovative policy, practice, and changes in funding as well. Currently, the current Research Agenda Coalition is encouraging federal, state, and local foundations to address the high priority research gaps. And we are currently actively promoting conversations in a few key topic areas. Some of these topics include, some of these topics have been helping research communities see the study participants as partners in the research. So moving from just, instead of having them as someone we utilize, we are and like asking questions, or so we are now putting them as a partner and as prioritizing a commitment to social justice. So we believe that stakeholder involvement will help researchers focus on the most critical issues, especially if this is actively funded adequately. Participation by community leaders and people with lived expertise in the development of the research study lays the groundwork for the type of collaboration required to conduct the research ethically and effectively. To that end, some cultural experts and people with lived expertise on our team have just produced a DEI tool, which I'm more than happy to drop in the chat as well. And this is to help enhance the program planning and research study development. These collaborative research approaches can help ensure that the research meets the needs of not only researchers, but children, families, communities, and the provider organizations. So we are trying to improve how research is done overall while we help get more studies funded in the high priority gaps. And I can also drop the link in as well to the website. For more information, you can please see our 5-page initiative overview, which I can email, or if it hasn't been emailed to you already. And I also put, like I said, the DEI tool, the website, all the links needed. Even and my email as well, in case you guys need to reach out, I have any questions or want further content on it. But thank you for investing on your time today with us, and a special thanks to our speakers. So thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Alex. I think Mary is going to also share a brief welcome as before we get started.
So let me just add my words of welcome to all of you that are here live with us, and also those of you that are watching us later on YouTube. We have an incredible group of speakers. And so on behalf of the American Academy of Social Work and Social Welfare, I want to really thank the foundations for investing in this opportunity for us to really think hard about how, when we come together with research and our partners that represent children and families and communities, we can actually come up with new solutions to societal greatest challenges. And I could not think of a more important issue that we tackle is really housing stability, family homelessness, and how we support kids and families to thrive. And so with that, let me turn it over to our speakers, and I will be back with you at the end to facilitate some question and answer. I want to, before we turn it over, also, Nicholas, Sanjam, Stephanie, you're amazing partners, as always. So thanks so much for organizing this with us. So with that, take it away, presenters.
Great, thank you. Well, welcome everyone. I'm going to start us off here. My name is Ben Henwood. As was mentioned, I'm a professor in the School of Social Work here at the University of Southern California in Los Angeles. I'm trained as a clinical social worker, and most of my research focuses on homeless adults. They tend to focus on older adults. But today we really wanted to focus on issues related to family instability. My other related hat here at USC is I also direct our Homelessness Policy Research Institute. It's a joint institute between our School of Social Work and our School of Public Policy. And it's a little different than a lot of research institutes because we use a collective impact model. We're made up of over 150 individuals. We have researchers, policymakers, service providers, people with lived experience of homelessness. And we're really here to accelerate equitable and culturally informed solutions to homelessness, specifically in Southern California and Los Angeles. And we do this by advancing knowledge and fostering transformational partnerships between research, policy, and practice. And so what that really means is trying to create venues to have discussions where researchers can talk to policymakers who can also include people with lived experience and those providing services on the ground. And it's really important to have that dialogue. And so I just want to thank our host today for inviting us, because we do want to highlight different perspectives, and I'm really grateful for my fellow presenters. I will mention that for the past over 5 years now, I've also been co-leading with Dr. Deborah Paget the Grand Challenge to End Homelessness, which was originally an initiative born out of the American Academy of Social Work and Social Welfare to tackle sort of these these important social issues of our day. And currently now we have Emmy Titterington at Rutgers University and Amanda Kanian at University of Buffalo, who's leading that effort right now. But myself and Deborah, we continue to work on that Grand Challenge initiative. Unfortunately, Dr. Paget isn't with us today. She had a family emergency, so I just wanted to thank her for helping bring together today's presenters. And of course, we'll be thinking about her and her family. So, I'm going to start off with just a few comments, but I really wanted to get, I think, in part because my area of focus is not specifically on families, but we do have Samantha Batko, who's a senior fellow at the Urban Institute and really an expert in this area to kind of help us with some of these issues, as well as Rhonda Jackson, who's a senior fellow with the Family Homelessness Coalition, and she really has her own expertise, having experienced the type of homelessness we'll be speaking about today. And so I'd really like to, move to hear from them both. But I will present some slides that Dr. Paget put together if you want to go to the next slide, because I think it's important, right, to realize that we're sort of in this transitional time around how policy issues are going to move forward. And family homelessness in particular has been sort of this invisible crisis. I think a lot of the attention tends to go to folks that you typically will see nowadays on the streets, and they tend not to be families. We help with the annual point in time homeless count here in Los Angeles, and it's quite difficult for us to find unsheltered families to interview for that project. And so, you know, when we think of families, we often are talking about single mothers with young children. Although I have to say some of that is probably a byproduct of the way our systems have divided families up, and we'll hear more about that in a little bit. So you can go ahead and move to the next slide. I think that you know, part of this, just to kind of give you a sense of the scope of the issue, you know, each year there's a annual report from Congress that comes out on the state of homelessness. And so, you know, our most recent report, you can see the numbers there. Over 57,000 households were experiencing homelessness on any given night. That is an increase from the previous year. That accounts for over 186,000 individuals. And keep in mind that those are the individuals that meet the federal definition of homelessness. And so that does not include, you know, families that are doubled up, which they would fall into the U.S. Department of Education definition. So even, you know, we have problems in defining, and I just want to be clear about who we're referring to in this case. And so with the HUD definition, as I was saying, you know, most families will be found and reside in shelters. There's a small portion, again, that will be unsheltered in some form. And of course, the disproportionality of people of color, in particular African Americans, is clear across kind of all groups in the homeless population. And we see this in families as well, with approximately half of all families identified as African American. So you can go to the next slide. Just from a, you know, oh, actually, if you could advance, well, I'm gonna ask Sam to talk about some of these issues. But I did just want to say, you know, in terms of the research, I do think that family homelessness is one of these areas that has not gotten as much attention. And so we just kind of wanted to highlight quickly that the family option study sort of stands out as a large scale randomized control trial that was conducted starting in 2010. And you can see there were over 2,000 families involved, and they were randomly assigned to one of four different arms. And you can see those here on the slide. We had people randomized to receive rental vouchers with no additional support services. Others were randomized to receive project-based transitional housing. So that's mostly in congregate settings, and there would be on-site support there. Rapid rehousing, which has sort of gained some traction, is more that temporary housing rental assistance that people receive. It's time limited. And then, of course, we had sort of the usual care, which is just, you know, people scrambling to find places to stay, including shelters and crisis centers. And so in this study, they really wanted to look at, you know, issues around which one of these arms would produce the best housing stability, as well as sort of that family, relational parent and child well-being. So if you go to the next slide, I think you know, the thing to note here is that even the best laid, you know, plans here in terms of conducting a really highly rigorous randomized controlled trial. In this case, you know, one of the arms, in fact, where people were assigned that sort of congregate settings, many of those individuals assigned to that situation actually decided they weren't interested in that option, and so they ended up sort of back into the usual care. And that's why you can see that over, you know, close to 750 families were assigned to usual care, and then a lot of the folks who were assigned to project-based housing ended up dropping out of that. And so a large portion of the study really had that kind of control group who ended up in usual care. I think most of the positive outcomes we saw in that were from the rental vouchers, not necessarily with supports, but just receiving those rental vouchers, and the rapid rehousing outcomes were positive. And I think, a lot of times we talk about this in cost benefit, and they were the least costly. And so it's interesting now that I think HUD is pursuing a follow-up of the family option study. And so it'll be interesting to see kind of the longer term effects of that. So I just wanted to kind of set the stage because it is really actually important. And you can stop the slides at this point, because there's an additional slide, but we can come back to that. I think what I really wanted to do, again, because we have Samantha Batko here, who has really been leading a lot of this work. She is part of our collaborative at HPRI. And so I just wanted to welcome her to kind of frame some of these issues. And then hear also from Rhonda Jackson before we get to some discussion points and questions from the audience. So Sam, if you don't mind, I'm just going to pass it over to you. I believe you have slides, and I think we're going to handle those for you. Is that correct?
I think so. I also thought we were going to Rhonda first. So if Rhonda's.
Oh, that's okay. Yes, that's great.
Sorry.
That's totally fine. Rhonda, are you prepared? Sorry, I had us in the other order, but we would love to hear from Rhonda.
Hey, no, I'm never prepared for nothing. But I am here. Thank you for inviting me to this briefing. It's really important. But people like me, what in the world is that? People like me, I don't like that. Sorry.
That's okay. I can see some words there on your screen, but they're gone now. Okay.
Those are my favorite words. Children learn what they live. That's my motto. So I'm here to tell you a little bit about my story and what I do. I am part of the Health by Housing Speakers Lab with NYU Langone. I am also the senior fellow with the Family Homelessness Coalition. And so what I want to really talk about is my experience. My homelessness journey actually started in Florida in a van with my son and 2 grandchildren. And so it was kind of difficult, but we ended up at the shelter that's in Miami, which actually gave us a lot of support for the children and for the family, actually. So as an advocate for children, I'm troubled about the cycle of poverty that traps so many of our young people, because they're the ones who actually get forgotten. Like, we talk about the adults, we talk about the seniors, and we talk about family, but we don't necessarily focus on the children. And though the children that are in this crisis really suffer. My son suffered badly. We got to a shelter here in New York. We had to leave Florida. We had a whole journey, up and down the East Coast. And when we got to New York, we were able to get into a family shelter. He was about to turn 18. And so then they've tried to separate you, but because of the support that I did go looking for, because sometimes you have to look for stuff. You can't just sit there and wait on something to come. And so he almost got killed by a gang because he didn't want to join. He had got a job and they fired him because he was in shelter. So there are a lot of little idiosyncrasies that come with being in shelter. So he almost got killed. It was really hard. And so for children growing up in poverty, the odds are overwhelmingly stacked against them. And far too many of them often get overlooked, ignored, pushed aside, and almost forgot. They're not really invisible. We just don't see them. So James Baldwin actually wrote a book called The Invisible Child. And this captures the harsh reality, reminding us that these children, they are seen, but they're left unsupported by a society that really fails to address their needs. Like going in shelter, families struggle daily to provide stability. It's crazy how, as a parent, you try to protect your child, and then while you're in shelter, you can't navigate it like how you want to I don't want to say handle, but just help your family. And so many times we're not supported by that. And so living in the confines, I call it the confines of shelter because it's almost like jail, but well, temporary housing, these children deserve more than just a means of survival. We deserve, families and children, we need the tools to thrive. And so our challenge is that we keep getting uprooted repeatedly. That happened to me from Florida to Georgia to North Carolina and Delaware, and then finally New York. So that has a lot of far-reaching consequences. My child suffered mentally really bad. And so because our young children here in New York, K-6, that are in transitional housing or shelter, they have far-reaching consequences. And these children are suffering mentally, physically, spiritually, academically, socially, and emotionally, especially when forced to change schools repeatedly, because here sometimes, and I haven't heard about, our new arriving families, but here in New York, they have like 60 days. They're trying to fix that, and they get relocated or moved to another shelter. And so those children have to be reacclimated in another school, in another district, in another neighborhood, unless the parent wants to take the journey to keep them in the school that they're in. So these concepts, they go real far. Almost 40% of our families, this comes from the Family Homelessness Coalition policy guidelines, 40% of our families, or 146,000 children, are in our New York City schools that are unsheltered, unhoused. You mentioned the pit count. Here in New York, they know it's coming. We hide. They hide. They'll go to somewhere else, but they won't show up to be counted. So this disrupts their education, of course, and their support system. This instability exacerbates the already profound challenges that these children face. Our parents face a daunting uphill journey. The shelter system is not designed for long-term solutions, and families frequently lack the resources or guidance to establish stability when they leave, which is aftercare support. It's really important for aftercare, or even in care. It should start in the shelter. That's where aftercare should really start, so that those families will get the tools that they need. In FHC, our solutions are to target practical solutions, which will prioritize stability and opportunity. We want to expedite housing placements. By accelerating our housing placements, this ensures that our families will spend less time in shelters and can begin rebuilding their lives sooner. This reduces the stress and the uncertainty that impact families' overall well-being. We want to improve the eviction prevention and aftercare. We really don't want any more evictions once you get out of shelter. We want you to be able to stay in your home. They call it permanent housing, but it's really not, So anyway, we want you to be able to have these preventive measures and we want to provide counseling and employment support and financial literacy, which is extremely important. We now have this new thing, universal income, and a lot of families, you got to be pregnant or have a child under 2. and you get like one of our programs is you get like, I think it's like about $14.50 a month. And so if you don't know how to spend that $14.50 plus all the other monies that you may be getting, you'll be right back in the same situation. So financial literacy is extremely important. And it also will help your children. You know, I'm trying to get this thing in our section where children in school will get these little yellow envelopes, and at the end of the week, they can put all their change in, and they'll be able to put it to start a little bank account, a savings account. Hopefully that'll help. I hope that gets through. And so we also want to enhance the education continuity for families with children in grades K through 6. We know that maintaining school stability is essential. Relocating within the same borough wherever possible, you know, minimizes disruptions, and it keeps the children in familiar environments, which allows them to retain the support systems and thrive academically, because that is what's going to get them through in this life. And so in my conclusion, because I know I'm probably over time, I'm going, as researchers, I'm a researcher, policymaker, activists, and advocates, we should share a collective responsibility to ensure that these children and families have the tools to succeed. The words of James Baldwin that I talked about in the beginning is, it reminds us that these are all our children, and we will profit or pay for what they become. We must choose to invest in their futures by creating a society where children are not forgotten and every family has a way to thrive. Together, through thoughtful policy and unwavering commitment, we will build pathways out of poverty and ensure stability, dignity, and opportunity for all. Thank you. And I hope that sort of kind of answers the question.
Yeah, that was great, Rhonda. Thank you so much. Because I think in a lot of ways you highlighted that when we have these discussions around homelessness, we often are so focused around just addressing that particular problem and the issue around shelter, and maybe not as focused on what that means to provide that sort of stability so people can thrive. And I think just highlighting kind of the longer term effects of the impacts of these young children and how that will feed into the future is really important to keep in mind. So I think that's really helpful framing, and I'm sure that you know, we may have some even questions about that. But I think that's great. And Sam, now would be a great time then. Sorry about that confusion. But yeah, if you can you know, help build on some of what Rhonda was talking about and really, you know, how that fits into where we are with some of these policy discussions now, that'd be great.
Sure. And Ben, thanks. Rhonda, thanks. And really the presentation that I'll do, I'll keep it fairly high level and stick to my time limit, but really builds on what I think a major theme has been in both Rhonda's comments and Ben's, which are that family homelessness is the result of large scale economic and system forces that are not it's not driven by individual parents' choices or individual people's decisions. And so we can go to the next slide. And so when really thinking about like the policy landscape and family homelessness, what we typically think of as the homelessness response is actually probably the smallest force that's acting on family homelessness in comparison to the much larger forces of the overall housing and economic markets, the functioning of social safety net programs and the accessibility of social safety net programs and their comprehensiveness, and then the homelessness response. And so what I'm going to try to do is walk through how some of the policies in these bigger systems are drivers of what we see with respect to family homelessness, and also what the policy outlook is for these programs and their that potential influence on family homelessness, as well as talk about some specific policies within the homelessness response itself and the policy outlooks for those. So to start with, we can go to the next slide. To start with, from a variety of evidence over the last 30 years, we know that housing affordability, meaning both the cost of housing and its availability and accessibility, as well as households' ability to afford housing as a result of income, so wages and unemployment, is the primary driver of homelessness. So vacancy rates, median rents, the difference between income and housing cost increases, these are what drive rates of homelessness overall, as well as rates of family homelessness in large part. And so when we think about policy levers that really would drive or either increases or decreases and incidences of family homelessness, we're looking at housing affordability, wages and unemployment, the cost of other things in families' lives, including healthcare, groceries, and other family expenditures, as well as some of the market forces. So that can be discrimination in the housing markets, discrimination in the employment markets, and these are going to be the major forces that result in either increases or decreases in family homelessness. And the policy outlooks on these are a little bit uncertain currently. It's likely that despite a very large conversation around housing supply that's been happening over the course of the last year in the general public and among the presidential campaigns and in local and state elections, that the housing supply approach is likely to be more on the home ownership side, more on the banking and developer driven side, as opposed to a more affordable housing supply approach from the federal level. This has the potential to still create like an increase in supply, does have the potential to like trickle down and create more affordable housing, but that's not something that we see like very prevalently within the evidence. There's also uncertainty with respect to both employment, unemployment, and wages due to conversations around tariffs and like larger things that would drive costs and profits within large corporations. We know that the costs of healthcare have continued to grow across the country, both insurance and care itself, and that there are potential threats to the Medicaid expansion that was accomplished during the Affordable Care Act, and that there is likely going to be some attacks on or rollbacks of some protective policies around discrimination in the housing markets. And I think the prime example that we've seen from both the first Trump administration as well as what's been talked about in the lead up to this one is the affirmatively furthering fair housing policies coming out of HUD. So that's our big picture outlook. Some of the drivers that we would expect associated with family homelessness are potentially in like precarious positions without us knowing exactly what's going to roll out there. If we go to the next slide, we're going to talk a little bit about the social safety net programs that families need access to in order to avoid homelessness. And so primary housing support is our housing choice voucher program and our public housing programs in this country. Public housing has continued to decrease in the number of housing units. Currently in the US, 1 in 5 people or 1 in 5 households that qualify for a housing choice voucher receive one. And those are our major housing supports for extremely low income households. We also have other federal benefit programs, the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families program, most commonly referred to as TANF, the food stamp and WIC programs for families, and of course, SSI and SSDI support for families who have people with disabilities in them. The policy outlook for all of these programs is a little bit uncertain at the moment. There is a large emphasis on quote unquote efficiency within the federal government for the incoming administration. And certainly there have been talks about just wholesale eliminating programs and agencies. It's uncertain the actual ability for the administration to do that or what that would look like, which programs would particularly be on the chopping block. We also would expect, given the incoming administration and the shaping of Congress currently, that there will be budget cuts to discretionary programs. These discretionary programs are a lot of the programs that are sitting here right now. And that could potentially mean cuts to benefits, cuts to housing vouchers, less people receiving housing vouchers or other types of benefits. And then some of this program, TANF already has work requirements attached to it, but the other programs don't currently. Work requirements are a ever rising policy area that comes up with respect to SNAP, with respect to housing vouchers, with respect to public housing receipt. And so certainly work requirements will be among the policy discussions that happen in the coming months. And would make it more challenging for people to access and retain benefits. So we'll go to the next slide, make sure that we have some time for questions. So when we get down to the homelessness response, the primary homelessness response with respect to family homelessness is shelter. So these temporary housing programs, sometimes you may hear it called shelter, interim housing, and then housing first programs. So permanent supportive housing and rapid rehousing. And access to vouchers to the extent that that's possible. Housing First is a long-standing policy for the federal government at this point. We're looking at about almost 20 years where it's explicitly stated in the homeless assistance programs. And another important rule, which Rhonda actually touched on a little bit, is the equal access rule, which was passed as part of the HARTH Act in 2009 to ensure that families are not separated at shelter entry as a result of their family composition. And the equal access rule was under threat during the first Trump administration. And there's, again, potential that it could be under threat here too. All of these programs are also up for potential discretionary cuts at a variety of agencies. So while the bulk of the shelter and rehousing resources for people families experiencing homelessness come through HUD, there are also programs that are specifically for young people, young parents, people fleeing domestic violence that come through HHS that would also be at risk through discretionary cuts at various agencies. We know that the incoming administration does not support a housing first approach. There's a prioritization of a treatment first approach, which going back to Ben's presentation, this is the transitional housing program that was tested as a part of Family Options and had previously been tested as a part of a multi-site RCT on transitional housing in the 90s. And like I said, there is likely going to be threats to the equal access rule, which would make it more challenging for families with teenage boys or families with non-married partners to be able to access emergency shelter and potentially housing programs as well. And so with that, I'm just going to kind of I can go to the next slide, and I'm going to give a little bit of an overview of where the evidence that we have on the variety of approaches to family homelessness over the course of the last 30 years, as well as like the individual level program evaluations have kind of pointed us to like where policy should be based on the evidence and what we know works. And so the first would be addressing these underlying affordability challenges, both with the cost of housing as well as people's incomes. So that's comprehensive housing, infrastructure, living and housing level wages, and income supports for people who are unable to work, and housing vouchers for people who are unable to afford housing. Additionally, there would be protections against housing discrimination in the private market. This would be both like protections with respect to race and ethnicity, family composition, as well as potential incarceration history, other pieces like that currently are implemented in sort of a patchwork across different jurisdictions and the extent to which they've been able to be passed locally, but federal protections against that type of housing discrimination isn't currently happening. We also have effective mainstream entitlement education and services programs to ensure that young children, like Rhonda was talking about, were getting access to early education programs, that would be consistent across jurisdictions, and it would be resourced at a level that families wouldn't have the disruptions that Rhonda was describing and experiencing, and that we would have a well-resourced homelessness response system for the rare instances of housing instability, as opposed to what we have right now, which is under-resourced homelessness response system for extremely prevalent incidences of housing instability. And with that, I'll turn it back over, and I'm happy to talk about any other policy ideas or anything that I missed, which I'm sure I did.
Wonderful. Thank you, all of our presenters. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise, your voices to this important policy briefing. So there is a lot of questions that have been organized for me in the chat. So and I'm going to start, I guess, with Samantha, since you ended, but Rhonda, you're next, and Ben, we're going to get to you if finally, okay? So I can imagine in this transition from one administration to the other, you use the words over and over again, uncertainty. And so one of the questions relates to your triangle, where you talked about kind of the economy, employment as being kind of the biggest and perhaps the most important kind of driver to help families have housing stability. Are there any interesting market-driven solutions, opportunities to collaborate with businesses, with developers, with banks, to do something that we're not doing currently that is more consistent with some of the changes that we anticipate? Or is it really that we need to protect the policy wins that we've had in a lot of uncertainty? Just help me to sort out, is there any space where you could see us proposing some things that we could work on together in this area of uncertainty?
Well, I think it's a both and. I think
Okay.
protection is incredibly important right now. I think that there's lots of evidence for the programs that we know work. There's a ton of evidence for housing vouchers, not just within the
Yes.
homelessness space, but certainly the family option study is one there. There's lots of housing voucher studies that sit in just the general housing voucher space that also show the evidence for that program. And I think that exists across the spectrum. It exists for housing first. It exists for anti-criminalization, of which I know Ben has a lot of experience on the individual side around. To the extent that people are listening to evidence, it is there for the positive defense of the programs that we know work. With respect to like opportunities that I see around like landlords, developers, bankers, I think that there are some incidences of, in some places they're called like accelerator funds, where there is a pairing of private and public resources to expedite the speed at which buildings are built and reduce the per unit costs attached to those units. I know that at least one of them exists in San Francisco and another one exists in Florida and Jacksonville. I'm sure there are others that I'm not aware of. And then in addition, I think that a strategy that has been increasingly used in LA, and I know has also been used for a long time in San Francisco, and some other places have been experimenting with it, is a strategy around master leasing, which is really to minimize the market-based discrimination that people face. So like both discrimination to a source of income as a voucher holder, as well as any other types of market-based discrimination, race, ethnicity, family composition, incarceration history, because in a master leasing scenario, the person leasing directly from the landlord or the developer is a nonprofit or government agencies that's taking on the risk associated with the rental payment and the tenants, and then is subleasing to tenants. And in very small isolated incidences, we've seen this contribute to being able to do development, seen this to contribute to speed of getting people into housing. And so I think that is a market-based strategy. I think there's a lot more investigation that needs to be done around like the costs associated with that, who benefits the most from that, et cetera. But that is one that I've seen too. And Ben or Rhonda, I welcome you guys to.
Ben or Rhonda, anything that Samantha might have missed, or I'll go in a different direction. Okay. Rhonda, there's so many positive comments about your prepared remarks. And so thank you so much. So a couple of questions. If you could kind of advise us on the best practices, the best way to engage with youth, the best way to engage parents. Is there a particular stance, approach, ways that you could see people be better supported as they transition perhaps from a crisis to more stability? Because you mentioned there's a lot of barriers to transition from kind of a homeless situation to real housing stability. So any advice that you can have, because I can see that there's a number of practitioners on our call too, about how they can use themselves and their social service resources to best support youth and their parents.
Thank you for that question. So what I can say is everyone that is involved with youth is to talk to them, communicate with them. A lot of times you can't separate the parent from the child, right? Unless it's like some kind of ACS issue. But if there's a way that, and there is, here we have the Youth Action Board here, and they have like this app that any youth can use, and they have like over almost 200 places or whatever they need, right, that they can tap into on the app, which is really, really cool for you, right? That way they don't feel that someone, it's led by them, it's led by youth. So the best thing I can say is to just listen to them, because it's more when a child is uprooted, and I'm really a child advocate, so that's why I keep uplifting the children, because I really believe that they learn what they live. And so when they see their parent moving and trying to get, struggling and navigating, that also helps them, but then they feel lost. Like for my son, when we did that whole gang episode and he almost got killed, and then he got introduced to K2 or K9 or whatever that stuff is, and we had to call, the medical professionals, but at that time we didn't have 988 that they could call. They would call 911. And so he almost really, the second time, became a casualty of being a Black kid in New York City. So, but we got through that. And once we found housing, once they helped us get housing, let me be honest, because we didn't look for it, they actually helped us to find it, the shelter that we were in. And we got in, and he started to meter out, to really get himself back. So now I'm the proud mama of a private first class in the Army. So the thing that I can say is just whatever family that you're involved, get invested in them, because they are an investment, and you will get a return on that investment if you just talk to them.
Thank
That's
you.
all I can say.
And you know what? It is so, in some ways it's simple, and in some ways it is the hardest thing.
The hardest thing.
And so to really us invest in the human beings, and to offer hope and as many resources, and to be on that journey. There's a lot more questions. So Ben, I'm going to go to you around research. And this relates to the next question around advocacy. Is there a better way? Is there more research that needs to happen in this area to improve the circumstances of kids and families? Is there a better way to use existing research that fuels advocacy efforts. Just talk to us from a researcher around how the science can actually make a difference and in policymakers' hands.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think what's challenging is, we have plenty of evidence that shows, like, for example, what Samantha was talking about earlier about the effectiveness of housing choice vouchers, right? And yet at the same time, only 1 in 4, 1 in 5 people who qualify for them will actually ever get them. And so, that is in some ways purely an advocacy issue at this point. It's not really a research issue, which is not to say that there aren't other challenges, right? I mean, it's interesting now that the Department of Housing and Urban Development is asking for more research on whether providing, and Rhonda talked about this, whether providing direct cash transfers might be more advantageous to a housing voucher. So actually just putting money in people's hands rather than a voucher of equal, amounts of value. Just because, there are lots of vouchers that go unused because landlords aren't willing to accept them and some of the, what comes along with them. So, there is interesting new research that now is kind of looking at those different approaches. And so, there's still a role to play in all of this. But I do worry because we are seeing more and more research done on cash transfers and basically universal basic income of some form. And a lot of that emerging research now is showing, pretty beneficial results from providing those funds. At the same time, Sam was talking about the work requirements that are being added to a lot of benefits we're getting, which is totally in the other direction of just sort of giving cash with no strings attached to it. And so, part of this, it is about knowing what works and what doesn't work, and I think that there's still a role for that. Part of this is ideological to some extent, and I think I've heard the term defensive research be brought up as we move forward, and it's like, what does that mean exactly? But look, there may be a role to still do research to show what the impact of these policy decisions are going to have, just so we will have the evidence to say, if something's working or not working. And I think that is kind of the role of research. But obviously, you want that to go hand in hand with advocacy. And so that, those are important discussions. So I appreciate the question, but I think we're going to have some challenges as we move forward and with different directions.
Right. But I think that what you made the very strong case that there is a set of things that are known, and we as scientists have to be very crisp about putting those forward, maybe even without ideology, but that these are the facts. And I think that's a really important role. All right, let me go to advocacy, because this group is of audience members really want to know, are there ways that they can get involved? Are there particular advocacy efforts, for example, on increasing rental assistance or security deposits, for example, development of more affordable units? If I'm an engaged audience member here, what are the organizations that you think are marshaled to do important advocacy work?
I'm happy to jump in, and then others can join. So I think, I've worked in the policy space on homelessness for almost 20 years now. I'm a little biased because I've worked in some of the policy organizations I'm about to suggest, but I think one of the most important things that needs to happen in the coming year in particular is that people need to talk to Congress. So one of the primary role of Congress is to authorize and appropriate. And oftentimes Congress people, senators, representatives are in large part judged by the amount of resources that they bring into their jurisdictions, their states, their districts. And talking, like what Ben was saying, talking about what the impact of cuts would be in your community when you talk to your own representative is incredibly important. And there are a number of organizations that are that organize people around their congressional delegation. So the National Alliance on Homelessness does at least one Hill Day every single year. The National Low Income Housing Coalition also does a Hill Day every year. The National Housing Conference has an organizing day attached to their conference as well. And so serving in your state delegation, speaking to your Congress members during those days, as well as at other times when there are calls for action that come out of those organizations, is incredibly important. And I also don't want to diminish the importance of local action and engaging with organizing forces that are happening within your own community. A lot of housing decisions are made at the local level, particularly like zoning, transportation decisions, things like that. And so being an active voice locally is also incredibly important.
Ben, Rhonda, any last words?
Rhonda, are you gonna?
No, I'm
I-
not.
Okay.
I just wanted to, reiterate what Sam was saying about at the local level, because I think, look, obviously to make a lot of these structural changes, we might need to rely on some of that federal action, but a lot of this work does get done locally. And so I think, particularly around the housing development and zoning, and to really get invested in wanting to see those solutions. And that's where a lot of Oh,
Terrific. So we are 2 minutes from our end time. This has been an incredibly rich discussion. I want to call your attention to a couple of things in the chat. Alex has put forward the summary of the 21st century research agenda that really we've identified a set of areas for research that would make a difference in terms of child and family and community thriving. So please pay attention to that. There is also a terrific tool around really a tool that can be used to help your programming and your advocacy work be inclusive. There was a webinar that the Academy sponsored just a few weeks back, where the developers of those tools, again, a diverse group of scientists and people with lived experience from systems, from communities, from a family perspective, put that tool together. So please pay attention to those new resources, as well as we are working actively with funders. So although some of us have been very dependent on federal funding, and we talked a lot about federal policy, federal funding, I think there's a real spaces for foundations like the ones that are sponsoring this webinar to actually spur, new solutions as well. And so I'm incredibly grateful for the partnership. With that, thank you again to Clark Fox Policy Institute, Sanjan and Nicholas from the Academy. We're incredibly grateful to our speakers, and we look forward, because we are fearless in this game, to an additional policy briefing in early 2025 that will focus on family homelessness and helping children and families thrive despite any of the uncertainties that Samantha, you alerted us to. And so more to come. Please watch your email for additional information. Thanks so much, everybody. We so appreciate you. Thank you.
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. And I'm just sharing again the link here that you can go back to find the recording once it's available. We also did have an earlier policy briefing in this series on early childhood education and child welfare, and the link to that recording is also available. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Stephanie, thank you. You're on.